uko sosiyete yacu nyarwanda ibayeho. Niyo mpamvu usanga uburwayi bwo mu mutwe ntabwo ari ikibazo cy'umuntu ku giti cye, nubwo hari imiryango, hari amasantere atandukanye ajyanwamo abantu bafite ibibazo byo mu mutwe bamaze kugera ku rwego rwo hejuru, niba ariko nabyita, ariko ntabwo ari ikibazo cy'umuntu ku giti cye. Kuva kera usanga umuntu ufite ikibazo cyo mu mutwe adahabwa amahirwe muri rusange. Hari imigani tujya dukunda gukoresha, udashinga ntabyina, ugasanga hari amaresponsabilite umuntu ugaragaza uburwayi bwo mu mutwe adashobora guhabwa. Inyana ni iya mweru, umukobwa ufite mama we ufite ibibazo byo mu mutwe, uburwayi bwo mu mutwe, usanga adashobora kubona abamurambagiza ku buryo bworoshye. Ibyo byose ni ibintu ubona ko biganisha ko ikibazo cyo mu mutwe kirenga kuba umuntu ari ikibazo cy'umwihariko, ari ikibazo bwite, ahubwo kikaba ikibazo rusange. Niyo mpamvu rero turi kubiganiraho cyane kuri uyu mugoroba kugira ngo tumenye icyo twakora noneho nk'abanyarwanda. Twakomeza twibajije rero tuti ni ukubera iki noneho tugomba kwita ku bafite ibibazo byo mu mutwe, cyane cyane ko twabonye ko kitakiri ikibazo cy'umuntu ku giti cye, ahubwo ari ikibazo cy'umuryango, umuryango bwite w'umuntu ufite icyo kibazo, ndetse bikaba binatera intambwe bikagera noneho ku muryango nyarwanda muri rusange. Reka tuganire tubwirane yuko umurwayi wo mu mutwe arashoboye. Hari ingero nyinshi z'abantu bafite ibibazo byo mu mutwe ariko bafite n'ibyo bashoboye muri sosiyete. Kandi twongere twibuke ubushakashatsi bwagaragaje ko umuntu umwe mu bantu 4 afite ibyago byo kugira uburwayi bwo mu mutwe. Ni ukuvuga ngo uyu muntu ufite ikibazo cyo mu mutwe, reka ntitubifate nk'aho ari ikintu kiri karande, ntitumuhe akato, twumve yuko natwe n'umuntu wacu wa hafi nawe ashobora kugira icyo kibazo, kuko ibyo byago birahari. Ariko by'umwihariko umuryango ufite umurwayi wo mu mutwe baba bafite ibyago byikubye kane ugereranyije n'abantu muri rusange, kubera ya mibanire, za mpungenge bahorana, igihe yagize amakrize atandukanye, uburyo babyitwaramo. Ibyo byose ni ibintu bituma amarangamutima yabo agenda akorwaho cyane, ku buryo ibyago byabo noneho biba byikubye kane kugaragaza depression cyangwa se icyo dukunda kwita agahinda gakabije. Mu Rwanda rero by'umwihariko nk'uko tubizi twese, kubera amateka ya jenoside yakorewe abatutsi, nacyo cyaje ari ikindi kintu cy'indengakamere gikora ku marangamutima y'abantu, bituma ibyago noneho by'abanyarwanda byo kuba bagira uburwayi bwo mu mutwe butandukanye ku ngero zitandukanye byiyongera. Akaba ariyo mpamvu tugomba kwita ku buryo twakwita ku bantu batuzengurutse. Twakomeza.
Ni hano?
Yego, naho ngaho. Twakwibaza rero tuti noneho twakora iki ko tumaze kubona ko ibyago ari byinshi, ko tumaze kubona yuko umuntu uwo ari we wese bidafite abantu runaka byihariye, twakora iki cyangwa se twakwita gute ku muntu ufite uburwayi bwo mu mutwe? Nituvuga uburwayi bwo mu mutwe twibuke kuri rya jambo ritangira ry'uko uburwayi bwo mu mutwe atari wa wundi wamaze kwiruka ku musozi nk'uko benshi dukunda kubitekereza, ahubwo dutekereze na wa wundi ufite ikibazo mu marangamutima, dutekereze na wa wundi ufite ikibazo mu myitwarire, dutekereze na wa wundi noneho ufite ibitekerezo bitandukanye n'ibitekerezo byacu, dukunda kwita ko ari ibibazo biri désorienté. Rero niyo mbumbe yose niyo igize mu by'ukuri ubwo burwayi bwo mu mutwe. Hari ingingo rero ebyiri natekereje z'ingenzi ariko zikubiyemo ibintu byinshi, ariko umuntu wese witabiriye umugoroba numva izi ngingo ebyiri yazigendana. Ntabwo mu by'ukuri mvugaho byinshi cyane ko dufite umwigisha nyamukuru Brent araza kubivugaho mu magambo arambuye, ariko reka turi kubire muri izi ngingo ebyiri. Icya mbere, dukwiriye kugira amakuru ahagije ku burwayi umuntu wawe afite. Ni ukuvuga ngo niba umuntu mubana mu buzima bwa buri munsi ubona ari imyifatire afite udasobanukiwe, niba se ajya kwa muganga afata imiti buri gihe, ukwiriye kumenya ubwoko bw'ikibazo afite, ukamenya ibihe by'ingenzi biranga uburwayi bwe. Ese ni ryari yagize crise? Ese iyo yagize crise yitwara gute, ese jyewe namufasha gute, ese afata iyihe miti, ese ubufasha ahabwa niba avurwa kwa muganga cyangwa se niba ataravurwa nihe nashakira ubufasha. Ni ukuvuga ngo Beyond the Veil ni umwe mu miryango itanga amakuru, twibanda cyane cyane ku gutanga ubumenyi ku bijyanye n'ubuzima bwo mu mutwe. Nakangurira rero buri muntu wese uri hano cyangwa se n'undi muntu uzakurikira iki kiganiro nyuma, dusangiza abantu amakuru. Nicyo kintu cya mbere cy'ibanze mbona muri sosiyete yacu nyarwanda dukeneye. Tumenye amakuru kugira ngo tumenye gufata ihene igihe biba, nk'uko dukunda kubivuga, mu gihe hari ikintu kitagenda neza mu muryango wacu cyangwa se ku muntu wacu wa hafi. Ingingo ya kabiri, dukwiriye kumenya natwe ubwacu ko twakwiyitaho, kuko mbere yo gufasha undi muntu, nk'uko abanyarwanda dukunda kubivuga ngo ujya gutera uburezi arabwibanza, niba dufite umuntu mu muryango wacu dukwiriye kwitaho by'umwihariko ufite ikibazo cyo mu mutwe, dukwiriye twebwe ubwacu kubanza kumenya ngo ese ndifata gute, nakwitwara gute. Ugomba kumenya rero kwiyumva, ukumva uko umerewe. Usanga abantu babana n'abantu bafite uburwayi bwo mu mutwe akenshi ahorana impungenge, ati ese ejo bizagenda bite, agahorana impungenge ariko ntagire igihe we cyo kwiyitaho no kwitekerezaho. Rero ntekereza ko ari ingenzi cyane kubanza kumenya uko wiyitaho wowe ubwawe kugira ngo ubone kumenya uko ufasha mugenzi wawe. Ugomba nanone kumenya neza aho inshingano zawe zigarukira mu kwita ku muntu wawe. Akenshi usanga birajyana na ya makuru tuba tugomba kumenya. Usanga ku bantu babana n'umuntu ufite uburwayi bwo mu mutwe ku nzego zitandukanye, atamenya ngo ese ngomba kwitwara gute, atamenya ngo ese ndahera hehe ndagarukiriza hehe. Ibyo rero ni inshingano zacu. Buri muntu wese akabanza akamenya ngo ese nakora iki kuri ya makuru. Umuntu wanjye namaze gusobanukirwa neza ikibazo afite, nasobanukiye neza noneho uburyo namufasha, ariko nanjye kandi ntishyize muri ka kaga ko kuba nakwiexposa, niba nabivuga gutyo. Murakoze. Rero ntekereza mu magambo makeya nasaga nk'utangiye. Brent araza kutubwira mu buryo burambuye ibijyanye no kubafasha, ariko ibyo bintu bibiri by'ingenzi ndifuza ko buri muntu wese witabira iki kiganiro yabitahana. Tugire amakuru, icyo ni icya mbere, kandi tumenye n'uko twiyitaho kugira ngo tubashe kwita ku bo dukunda. Murakoze.
Yes, urakoze cyane Kaneza, thank you so much. Turakwishimiye cyane, uri umuntu udasanzwe cyane, urakora akazi kadasanzwe cyane cyane gukora n'abanyeshuri, abarimu, abajene, abakuze, ni akazi gakomeye cyane. So urakoze cyane, turaza kongera kumwumva asoza nyuma ya Brent. Hagize ufite ikibazo ku bijyanye no mu Rwanda, hari abantu bagiye batwandikira tugira ati mfite umuntu wanjye mu Rwanda, ese namufasha gute, byagenda gute, ari uburyo ushaka gukonekta nawe, nyuma araza kugaruka. So Brent, thank you so much. So we're gonna have Brent right now. So Kaneza was just, sharing a little bit, important things that we should know, especially as Rwandans, when it comes to take care of someone who's suffering from a mental illness. And the most important part she shared was like, making sure that we have the knowledge and understanding of what somebody is going through. And, that include understanding, what kind of treatment they're taking, any support available out there, and many more. So I'm not going to repeat a lot, but I'm going to have to welcome you. And Brent, I think many of you are familiar with him. He's been with us. This is his 4th workshop, this year, and we appreciate him a lot. Not only that he's part of Beyond the Veil, helping us with, research, education, information. He's also a good friend of Rwanda. He's worked with our community, not only in Canada, in Rwanda as well. He has consulted with trauma services in Kigali, Rwanda, working with different churches here in Toronto. So Brent, thank you so much again. We're also happy again to have you and learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beyond the Veil, and thank you, Lydia, and thank you, Kaneza, for sharing already. I know I didn't really understand most of it. There was a word or two that I could understand. And of course, what happens when we have an international audience like this, we have some of us who speak like the mother tongue, so to speak, Kinyarwanda. Then there's those of us who are in the diaspora who speak English or maybe even French. And so, and maybe, you know, there are those of you who speak English and French who live in Rwanda too. But my part will be in English, because even though I spent some time in Rwanda, it wasn't long enough for me to learn too many words. But thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I really appreciate this opportunity to share and to just talk with everybody about this really important topic. I think that this is something I noticed in our previous presentations. This was a question that came up a lot. People were asking, how do I help so-and-so, you know, or how do I help someone who's struggling with addiction, or how do I help someone who's struggling with mental health? And so what we wanted to do today is we wanted to actually figure that out together with you. And so what we're going to do is we've put the link for Jamboard in the chat. So if you can maybe scroll back and take a look at that. I'm going to bring it up right now. I'm going to try to at least. This is my first time doing this incredible technology. So there we go. Hopefully you can see that okay. So you're going to click on the link and you're going to answer this question. And it is in English or in Kinyarwanda. And you can answer in whatever language you like out of those two languages. Or even French. We could probably decipher it between all of us in French too. So what mental health or addiction issues are your loved ones or friends facing right now?
Brent, without interrupting you, I just wanted to explain. Some people might be new here. So when you use this Jamboard, it's called Jamboard. So you're gonna see the sticky note. If you can point to the sticky note, Brent, so they can see it, or even try to open it. Try to open one.
Yes.
Yes. So type there, whatever you type there, it's gonna be anonymous. Nobody's gonna know who's writing. Nobody's gonna see your name. Just, you know, to respond to questions, you know, open the sticky note, click on this arrow right here, you know, open the sticky note and type your answer. So ufungure, you know, akano kanote sinzi niba, if you can point to the sticky note again, and wandike igisubizo cyawe, nta muntu uri bukumenye izina ryawe cyangwa usubije, buri muntu wese ashobora gusubiza mu buryo bwe uko ashaka. So murakoze. Okay, you can present again, Brent.
Okay, so yeah, just so I'm just waiting to see if anybody will answer. I've just put a couple of examples on here. So I think, again, one of the things that we've noticed in these presentations is that people are struggling with their mental health. People are struggling with various things going on, and they're wondering, how do I, like their loved ones are wondering, how do I support them? How do I take care of them? How do I even know that there's a problem? And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Just give you another moment or two to see if you want to, hopefully you're able to access the link. And
yeah, the first question is, you know, nizihe ngorane zijyanye n'ubuzima bwo mu mutwe abavandimwe bawe baba bafite? Ese hari umuntu w'umuvandimwe wawe ufite? Ese hari ingorane y'ubuzima? Ushobora kwandika izina gusa, ufungure link, utangire wandike, noneho twese dusubize. Murakoze. Sorry, Brent.
That's okay. No problem. So if anybody has, I won't leave it too long. I'll just go and talk through my slides. But we just wanted to give you an opportunity to see if anybody was interested in sharing. In this way, it'll help us to be able to focus on exactly what's going on for some of the folks you're noticing. Okay, there we go. There's one: anxiety, addiction, and depression. Okay, well, that's definitely the things that we'll be covering in this talk. Alcohol addiction. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely heard from people in Rwanda that is the main addiction people have. It's kind of like, you know, people aren't necessarily using heroin or cocaine or things like that, like some of the drugs that we hear about here in Canada. But definitely hear of people using alcohol for sure. Are there any other ideas? Urumogi, I probably said that wrong, but what does that translate to?
You said it well. It's that would be is it marijuana? Yeah, like yeah.
Marijuana?
Weed.
Okay.
I think it's weed.
Weed, yeah, weed, marijuana for sure. Okay. Yes. Okay. Any other ideas? Mental health or addictions issues?
Yeah, there are people who sent under the chart, yeah, marijuana, cannabis.
Marijuana, yes, I can see that. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a general idea here. A lot of the same sort of things that we would expect to see, I think, and definitely confirming what we've seen. Oh, there are someone did mention heroin and sex addiction too. Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing, everybody. I appreciate that. So heroin is, earlier I said, oh, probably heroin, like, according to what I heard, heroin isn't as big of a deal, but there is someone who said, well, no, actually it is something. Mugo is something that people are struggling with. So we can definitely talk about that as well. Okay, I think what I'll do at this point is I'm going to go to my slides. Yeah, and I'll talk about the barriers and stuff like that maybe later on. So let me just switch things here. Just be a second. Okay. So in terms of, we'll start with depression, just as a start. I know this is something that a lot of people are experiencing right now, especially with the pandemic. There's just so many people who are struggling with symptoms of depression. And so what is depression? I mean, some people aren't even sure, like Kaneza was saying, we need to have knowledge in order to be able to address these things. But I think a lot of people really aren't sure. They just think maybe depression is just being sad, which is definitely one of the symptoms, but there's all kinds of other pieces about depression that people experience too. So people can seem sad and tearful. That might be a huge sign of depression. They might be hopeless about the future. And of course, right now with the pandemic, I mean, a lot of people are like, they're not too sure about the future, what it holds, just in terms of, business for them or the lockdowns and all of this kind of stuff, right? So there's that concern too. People might talk also about feeling guilty, empty, or worthless though. So there's some differences there. People might seem less interested in spending time together, right? This is something that I've seen a lot with the people that I work with. I basically let Lydia introduce me this time, but I also work as a therapist for people and people from all over the world, different countries, including some countries in Africa, but as well as other places around the world. And this is something that I keep hearing from my clients, that one thing they do is they're pulling away from other people. They're not spending time with other people. They're isolating themselves in their homes, especially due to the pandemic and COVID and all that kind of stuff. And so they're really, really struggling with that. So that's really a big sign of depression. And it's really complicated right now because COVID makes it so that it's almost like you can be justified to do that, right? Like the government's telling you to stay home just for your safety. So people are just staying home now and they're not even trying to spend time with other people. But that can lead to other issues in mental health, right? If you're totally... I just heard an interesting echo there. I don't know if the rest of you heard that. So get upset easily or unusually irritable. Having less energy, that's a really, really big piece around depression. And again, the pandemic sort of makes that a little bit hard because there's going to be a lot of people who feel like they have less energy because their schedules are interrupted if they're still in lockdown or they have less to do. They might have less interest in their appearance, right? They don't take care of themselves. They don't, maybe their hygiene isn't very good. They have trouble sleeping or sleep more than usual. They care less about their usual activities, and they might seem forgetful or have trouble concentrating or deciding things. They might eat more or less than usual, and they also might talk about death or suicide. So I wanted to include these because I didn't want to just assume that everybody knew what depression looked like. So if you have a loved one who has some of these symptoms, then not that you are necessarily going to diagnose them, but you can say to them, hey, I noticed that you're struggling with your eating and your sleeping, and you seem to have less energy. What can we do to help you here? Is there something that, we can start talking about and figuring out together, right? So once you've sort of maybe realized that you have a loved one who's struggling with some of these things, then we can talk about what you can do about depression. And I'm sorry, some of my slides today, I don't know what I was thinking. There's a lot of words on them, but I'll talk you through them at least so you have an idea of what what they're about. And maybe the main thing is to look at the bolded letters. So what you can do to help your loved one with depression, well, you can encourage them to stick with treatment. Now, this might be something that's going to be different for our Canadian audience or our audience in Canada versus our audience in Rwanda, because I understand that there's not much treatment in Rwanda, whereas treatment's much more accessible in Canada. But the research does tell us that if you have a loved one who is getting treatment, then one thing that we can do is just say, hey, continue on with that, right? Like encourage them to keep going, encourage them to take their medications and to keep their appointments. One of the things that when my clients are struggling with their depression, they'll cancel their appointments with me. They won't even show up for their appointments to meet with me. And that's when I know they're really struggling. But if they keep their appointment with me, then I can start helping them. And usually by the end of the appointment, they start feeling better, and we have a plan as to how they can deal with their depression for the next week. So that's a really important piece. Be willing to listen. So this is one of the main things I wanted to leave with you today. Like, I know there's all kinds of points and all kinds of slides, but this is one thing that I want you to remember maybe the most. To let your loved one know that you want to be there for them, and that you're there to listen for them, right? Just listening and being understanding can be a powerful healing tool. There's all kinds of research that says this, but I think we also understand, just from a human point of view, how important it is to have someone who loves you, who's just going to sit there and listen to you, even if you're sharing stuff that's really hard to talk about, even if you're sharing stuff that's really really difficult, right? So this is a really important part that I want to emphasize. And even though I'm a trained therapist and everything, you might be surprised at just how much of my work is just listening to people. People telling me all kinds of stuff, and all I do is listen. And at the end of the session, they're like, "Oh, thank you so much. You helped me so much." And I'm thinking, all I did was just listen. I didn't even do anything. But they said, no. Like it's so rare that someone will listen to me without judging me. So thank you for that. So, and that's not to toot my own horn. I'm just saying that if it's something that I can do, it's something that you can do too. And you don't have to be a trained therapist to do that. So very, very important. You could also give positive reinforcement, which is just reminding them about how awesome they are, their positive qualities, how much that person means to you, right? How much you appreciate them. Just things like that, which just to help encourage them. And I know this seems like just common sense, but you might be surprised at just how important it is to have someone share something like that with you, just to share a nice word. It picks you up, it helps you to feel so much better, right? You can offer assistance just with practical things. And this is something that you can do whether you're in Rwanda or Canada, right? If they need help maybe buying food, right? At the grocery store or at the market, you can help them with that. Or if they need help fixing something in their house. You know what? I was actually talking to a client just yesterday. She's really struggling with her depression, like really, really big time. And she said that her place where she lives is so messy. It's just incredibly messy, and she doesn't like that. Normally she's very neat and tidy, but because she's just having a hard time with her energy, which is one of the signs we talked about earlier, she's just having such a difficult time cleaning her place. And so we talked about ways that she can invite a family member or a friend to come in and help her to clean up. And what a difference that would make for her if someone would just offer, or someone would be there to help her with that. Now, because of the role that I'm in, I can't offer that. So we've had to arrange someone else to do that for her. But what a difference that'll make. And so that's another way you can help somebody. Just something as simple as that, helping someone with a practical task that they need help with. If you're living with the person, you can create a low stress environment. This is really important. Maybe there's a regular routine that you can establish, right? Certain meal times, a certain bedtime, a certain wake up time, and a certain time to accomplish different tasks or whatever, right? That's also really helpful too, just to keep people structured. I find that structure, I have all these client stories today. I have another client who I spoke to yesterday who was saying that the weekend is really tough for her because she's not at work and her son is with the father because they've split up, right? So she's in her place by herself, and all she's doing is all weekend is just thinking about negative things, thinking about bad things that have happened to her, thinking about how she's feeling. But when she's working and during the week and she is taking care of her son and she's got all kinds of stuff to do, she feels better because she has a schedule, right? And I think that in the pandemic, this is something that we've noticed, that when our schedule is just like, if we've been under lockdown and we have nothing to do, we feel a lot worse, right? But when we're busy and we have stuff to do, it keeps us going, right? And so we can help by doing that, by having a less stressful structure going on. It's also helpful to locate organizations which can help your loved one, right? This may be more possible in Canada, but there's all kinds of different things. If you need help doing that, you can email me. I'll share my email later on in this, or you can contact Beyond the Veil and we can help you locate services, like if you're talking about a community in Canada. In Rwanda, we can maybe also ask, Kaneza, not to put you on the spot, but we can ask her as well what resources there are available in the community that you live in. And that way we can provide some help. And I understand there's less resources there, but you have Beyond the Veil at least, so you can also reach out to us, and we would obviously keep your information confidential. And also you can make plans together with your loved one. You can go for a walk, maybe watch a movie, do some kind of hobby together, right? Whatever you're able to do with them, I think is also really important. And this is something else that I find myself talking to clients about pretty much every day, just basically talking to them, asking them what are the things that they can do to help themselves with these feelings of depression. Now, another really important thing that I want to share with you. So I want you to remember the listening thing for sure. Remember that part. Everything else I said is good too, but the listening thing is really, really important. You can just listen to your loved one, just be there for them. But secondly, I want you to really remember this too, that you need to also think about yourself. And I couldn't really tell, but I almost wonder if Kaneza was saying something similar to this, just with the English words that she had shared throughout her slides, right? It sounded like she was saying, yeah, you too, self-care, you need to promote that. Now you can promote that for your loved one, of course, which is what I was just talking about, but you also need to promote it for yourself, because looking after a loved one is really, really hard. I'm going to tell you something. I know this is Facebook Live and everything, but this is something that's sort of a little bit confidential for me, in that I grew up with someone who is struggling with mental health. That's all I'll say, just in case any family members are tuning in. But, and it was really hard. And I didn't realize the impact that had on me until that situation had changed and that person wasn't in the home anymore. Then I realized, oh my goodness, like I've been giving up so much energy for years trying to support and take care and help this individual. And oh my goodness, wow, I didn't realize the impact that had on me. So we need to take care of ourselves. Supporting someone with depression or mental health is not easy. So you need to ask for help and find your own time for your hobbies, your physical activity, your friends, and your own spiritual renewal too, in order to be able to do that. Now, another thing that you could do that I know Kaneza talked about is you can also learn about mental health. You can learn about depression, right? There's all kinds of resources online. Really, honestly, if you just go back and look at for the last few weeks, the posts that Beyond the Veil has done on the social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, you'll learn all kinds of great information. And once again, I'm sharing stuff that's actually been shared really like all week long as they've been promoting this event today. There's a lot of great tips. So if I'm going too fast, or if my English is, if my accent's hard to follow, you can go back and read those things and definitely learn more. So definitely learn about mental health and depression. Take care of yourself. I want to stress that. It's a really, really tough task at times. So it's really, really important. And then be patient. So depression and mental health it's like a long haul, right? It's not something that gets fixed or solved overnight. It's something that usually takes some time. So it's important to be patient and to celebrate the good moments and to, be as strong as you can during the harder moments, supporting your loved one. All right. So I'm just gonna, while we're kind of pausing here in between, there's just some questions here that I wanted to just take a look at. How can we help someone who has schizophrenia? Okay, so I'm just looking at the questions here. And then newcomers tend to be reluctant. Yes. Okay, so I will, I'll answer those questions more towards the end of my time, okay? But this next section, it's actually very similar to the depression one, but it's talking about mental illness in general. All right. And so the schizophrenia question actually might fit into this. All right. So schizophrenia, it's actually, I'll just start answering it now because it's there. It's a really, really difficult mental illness, of course, to address, and very disturbing, right? And very, very sad to hear or to see people go through that. And again, I've had personal contacts with people who have personal as well as professional And it is very, very difficult. So I'm totally, my heart goes out to whoever asked that question. So first of all, what are the signs? So they might not really have interest anymore in the hobbies or the things they used to like to do. Again, very similar to depression, right? They might seem angry or sad for no reason or small reason. They might not seem to enjoy anything anymore. They might seem to have thoughts or strange voices going on in their head, and that is really a sign of schizophrenia, right? You'll know that for folks who have paranoid schizophrenia, they feel like there's always like a plot to get them. And with schizophrenia in general, they're known to have hallucinations or things like that, which really are disturbing for them. They might seem emotionally numb, and then they also might be healthy in the past, but now they're always saying they're not feeling well. Okay. So when you see these signs, you know that maybe there's something that you can do then. There's a few more signs of mental illness in general. Again, the eating patterns change, the sleep patterns change, so very similar to depression. Depression is a form of mental illness after all. They might seem anxious or terrified about situations that seem normal to you or to other people. That's actually a sign of trauma, right? So I would anticipate that a lot of people who went through the genocide might actually have that, right? They might be afraid of things that are not a problem, but really because it's triggered their memories of the genocide, it does cause problems for them. They've been missing more time from work or school. Maybe they've been drinking alcohol or using drugs to cope, right? So there's like a direct link between addictions and mental health that way. Usually people are drinking or using drugs to cope with some kind of pain, whether it's emotional pain or even physical pain. So that's important to think about, right? Like a lot of times we want to judge people for using alcohol or drugs, but they might actually have like a really understandable reason why they're using it. It's just that they're choosing the wrong kind of coping technique to deal with it, which in the end doesn't help them in the long run. But in the short term, it's actually making them feel a little bit better, even if it's just for a few minutes. But the problem is, of course, with drugs and with alcohol, there's all kinds of other consequences that happen as a result of that. Maybe they've been talking about wanting to take their life, or maybe they feel really hopeless, and they also could be avoiding their close friends and family members. So these are just some of the signs, and I anticipate that a lot of you actually know people who are going through some of these signs. So again, what do we do for someone who's experiencing mental illness? A lot of the things are very similar to the depression one, but I just wanted to put this up there just to kind of reinforce what I've been saying and to show you that a lot of things we talked about with depression can actually extend to like other forms of mental illness, including schizophrenia. All right. So knowing when something is wrong. So a lot of times being a loved one, you're the first person to really notice that there's something going on. And so again, if you look through the list of slides or the list of signs on the slides, you can maybe figure out if someone is struggling. By the way, Beyond the Veil has these slides, and they can share them with you if you request them, and I don't have a problem with that. Okay, so knowing that something's wrong, just noticing that something's wrong. Next, you can seek help. So friends and family members, you can be an important advocate for your loved one to get help. So a lot of times they're not really sure, so you can ask for help, right? Or they might feel like no one's gonna listen to them, or they might not know who to turn to, but you can ask for help. You can turn to a doctor and ask for help, at least in Canada you can. You can contact Beyond the Veil, ask us more questions if you want, right? You can contact a counselor or an organization that works with mental health. There's an organization in Ontario, well, in all of Canada, called Canadian Mental Health Association, CMHA. They have a lot of local branches across the country. Disclaimer, some of my work is actually through them, but I'm not trying to like get business for them or anything. Like you don't have to pay, and it's not like I benefit from this, but I just know that it's a big organization and they have offices all over the place. So that might just be one place to think of if you're in Canada. So seeking help, helping with medications and appointments and treatment where that's possible. Again, that's not the case for everybody, but maybe some of the people that your loved ones who are struggling, maybe they already have medication. So helping them to stay on top of that, helping them to get to treatment. Again, very similar to what I said with depression, right? Next, and this is something that we can all do, you can support a healthy lifestyle. You can maybe help with their finances or problem solving, help them to find really good housing, helping them with their nutrition, right? Promoting good eating. For a lot of my clients, that's what I talk to them a lot about. Like a lot of them some of them, you know, they're not really eating very well, which makes them feel worse. So I encourage them to set up a menu to start eating in a more consistent way. Recreation and exercise, and I don't necessarily think that exercise and recreation really solves the problems of mental illness, but it can really, really help. Like, it can help a lot. I've even noticed that with myself. You know, we all have mental health, right? Every single one of us. And I don't mean mental illness, but we all have a certain level of mental health, each and every one of us. And I've gone through the pandemic just like everybody else. And, you know, it's been one of those incredibly strange years. And I find that exercise really, really helps me. It really, really does help to relieve my stress, helps me to feel better. And so that might be something that you would also consider to promote with your loved one who's struggling with mental illness, as well as sleeping habits too, right? And then also providing emotional support. So once again, that piece around listening. So I've gotten these ideas from different research places and organizations, right? But they're all saying the same thing. You know, they're saying, listen, be there for your loved one. Listen to what they're saying. Don't blame them for their illness. You know, help them to not feel alone. Help them, you know, try to remind them that you are there for them, that you love them, and you can help encourage hope. Now, let me get really specific about the person with schizophrenia. Again, having had some experience with this personally, as well as professionally. One thing you can do is definitely you can listen and be non-judgmental and help them to understand that it's not their fault. It's not that they've done something wrong, and that there is hope, right? Because a lot of times folks who have schizophrenia do feel rather hopeless about it. Another really important piece for them, and I don't know if you're in Canada or Rwanda, but for me this happened in Canada, but helping them to stay connected to their treatment was really important. Encouraging them, telling them to helping them to understand how important it is to stick with it, to stick with the medication, to keep going to the doctor, to keep going to the psychiatrist, right? All of that stuff. So important, because schizophrenia is a very serious mental illness, and it's something that I've seen people try to figure it out on their own and not go to the doctor for. But I find that people have the best outcome if they are going to their doctor and if they're going to their treatment. And I don't say that for everything. I don't necessarily say that for anxiety or depression, for instance, or even trauma for that matter. I think there's a lot you can do for those things without resorting to medication. But for schizophrenia, it might be a little different. Usually medication. So something just to encourage you with, and I think also the whole idea of structuring a really healthy lifestyle for the person, I think is also really, really important. But again, the main thing is just really being there for them and listening to them. And like I said earlier, remembering yourself in the midst of this. Like I said, in my personal story, the impact on me was big. It was probably giving me some depression, to be honest with you. Helping my loved one through a lot of serious mental illnesses probably was starting to make me feel depressed, right? So I think it's really important to remember to accept your own feelings, to learn that you're not alone. I felt alone when I was going through this. Even though I was in a household with a bunch of people, I still felt alone. Learn more about mental illness, learn more about some of the things, you know, that you can do, as well as some of the symptoms of it and the outcomes for it. And stay connected too, because a lot of times, a lot of people are going to feel embarrassed, or they're going to talk about social stigma, or even fear. And these things prevent us from reaching out. These things prevent us from learning more about mental illness and for addressing it. And so just you tuning into this, again, I think it's so powerful what Beyond the Veil is doing by having these conversations about mental health every week here in the winter, and probably the hardest winter that people have ever experienced, at least in Canada, and maybe, you know, the hardest January to March that a lot of people in Rwanda have experienced, just with the lockdown and everything too. It's so important for us to be having these conversations and to be supporting each other and helping each other, right? And so that's been our intent with Beyond the Veil all along. But you can also talk to friends, loved ones, and hopefully they would be open to hearing a little bit about what you're sharing. And not only that, but even if you're sharing how you're struggling with caring for your loved one, you can also share that with them too. And maybe they'll even try to help you. All right. So remember about who's taking care of you in the midst of this. So I want you to remember listening, right? And I want you to remember taking care of yourself. Even if you just come away from this talk with just those 2 points from Brent, I'll be happy, because those are so important. All the other stuff, which maybe seems a little technical or whatever, it'll fall in place if you're really listening to your loved one and you're also taking care of yourself. Okay. There's other suggestions here too. Taking time for yourself, seeking help for yourself if you need it. And if you have access to a support group, you can do that too. And I'm not here to promote CMHA, but there it is again. It's just another option for people in Canada. And I guess for Rwanda, you could reach out to Beyond the Veil. We don't necessarily have support groups at this moment, but we can certainly support you through whatever you're facing with your loved one, and would definitely be a positive influence to help you with that. Okay, so I'm just looking at the time here. I've got a few more minutes. As usual, I've prepared way too much because there's so much interesting things to talk about. I'm sure Kaneza talked about some of these things in a way that made sense for people in Rwanda, but I had a part in my presentation here that just talks about understanding that in Rwanda, there's just so many different complications to these things. And probably a lot of things that I've said already really apply to our Canadian audience or audiences in Canada, as opposed to our audiences in Rwanda. So I'm really glad Kaneza spoke, because she was able to share about unique things. But there's also things that I could share too. So I recognize poverty is a huge barrier for people, and that a lot of families in Rwanda don't have the health insurance in order to access mental health, right? So this is a huge, huge piece. And not only that, but someone with a mental problem, especially in Rwanda, might be regarded as someone who isn't contributing to the family life and who's a burden to the family, right? So this is an attitude that I think a lot of people have out there. And it might even lead the person to be rejected from the family, which could also, of course, make their mental health even worse. So this is really, really difficult. There's a quote here from Rwanda from someone who was at a district hospital, and she said, "An ill person comes to hospital and is treated and gets better and returns back to hell," meaning the family that they were in. Because after we've treated them, we send them back to their families who've rejected them because of poverty. Even when they start getting better, these problems, the mental problems they have, can reoccur, especially among people who have no families. So that is a piece that I think a lot of people in Rwanda who have mental illness, like severe mental illness, are experiencing. Also, stigma is a huge piece, right? I know the question earlier was asking about refugees or newcomers to Canada. I think they said newcomers, to be fair. And so those are people who've come to Canada, and yes, they have a lot of those same attitudes about stigma, which maybe originated in like Rwanda, for instance. And so this fear of stigma causes delays in receiving treatment, right? If people are afraid of being labeled as having a mental illness or being called crazy or being called mad, then they're not going to go and get treatment. But what that means, though, is that then they continue to have problems in their lives, and it can lead to further issues, right? But let's recognize that having someone with a mental illness can affect the status of your family. That's true in Canada, but it's also true in Rwanda, maybe more true in Rwanda, right? And they don't want their illnesses to be known to the community, and so therefore they don't talk about it. But again, this leads to then the mental illness not really being addressed. And so that's why one of the things we're seeing in the research is if we can encourage people to go and get help, then this is a huge deal, right? That's a key factor, because the help does help them to get better, but there's a lot that stands in the way of that help, which is like the monetary stuff, so not being able to pay for it in Rwanda, and then the stigma. And not only that, but in this slide, I talk a little bit just about how a lot of people are still learning about in Canada, but also in Rwanda. And in a lot of the rural areas, there's not really people like Kaneza who are there. I wish we could reproduce her in a way and have her, go all over Rwanda. And maybe one day Beyond the Veil will do something like that. We'll train some other local leaders through the amazing work she's doing. But for now, they're few and far between, as you know, for those of you who live in Rwanda. And so therefore, when we do have someone like Kaneza in the neighborhood or in the community, it's such a big deal because she's able to help people. So what people do then instead is they turn to traditional healers and prayers, which I think can help to a certain extent, honestly. This can help, but it does delay people from getting help from like counselors or the medical field too. And I'm a spiritual person. I believe in spiritual stuff for sure, and I believe it's really, really helpful. But there, you know, you can say, I'll just say it from the way that I would communicate it in my faith. You know, I believe God created us not only as spiritual beings, but as physical beings and emotional beings too. And you can address something spiritually, but it doesn't always help the physical and the mental, right? Sometimes you need interventions at the physical and the mental, and that's where the doctors and that's where the counselors really come in, right? So I don't think, and this is just the way I believe, and I know that maybe it's a view some people, it's new to some people, so you can just chalk it up to me being the non-Rwandan guy. But I do believe, and I've seen it in my life, and even in my faith group, that it's okay to get help from medical and counselors, right? For mental health. It doesn't mean you're less of a spiritual person. And again, the spiritual part is really important too. So we need to, you know, we need to work on that aspect, but I think we do it in balance with the other way too. And I think you get the better outcome if you combine all of this together. Hope I'm not going too fast here. Actually, I did have a Jamboard about this, but our time, maybe I'll just continue because the bottom line is that there's some other pieces too here for Rwanda. Scarce resources in mental health care. I don't think I need to really expand on that too much. And then a gender imbalance too. So what that means, it might not mean what you think it is. What it means is that men tend to reach out for help less than women. That's actually true in Canada too. Men tend to wait until like their lives are in total upheaval before they reach out for help because of pride and because it's not manly to ask for help. And the same thing happens in Rwanda. And so what happens is men might be having a mental illness and they try to cope with it with alcohol, right? Or maybe another drug, maybe marijuana, like someone mentioned earlier. And so these are issues that we tend to see in Canada. We also see it in Rwanda. And it means that the men who are coming forward for help usually have really, really complex issues because they're dealing with all kinds of things. And it's better to reach out for help earlier before the problem gets to be too bad. So the research that I consulted, here you can see at the bottom, the best outcomes for people in Rwanda to deal with mental illness is to have a supportive family who understands mental illness. And of course, for people to have access to care. Now that second point is something that it's a long-term project that I know a lot of people are trying to work on in the community. Beyond the Veil is part of it by having Kaneza, you know, offer some counseling and help to people, right? So, you know, just trying to figure out ways that we can improve access to help. And so you can even access our social media Beyond the Veil and get some support that way. It will go a long way, but other help too is needed. But one of the best outcomes, again, is having a supportive family, having a supportive group of loved ones around you to encourage you, to support you, to listen, like I said, but people who will also balance their listening with taking care of themselves so that they have the strength to take care of their loved one. So that's a really huge, important piece here. Yeah, just looking at some of these questions, some of the CMHA website. Thank you. You didn't have to do that, but I appreciate you doing that. Again, I'm not a representative necessarily of CMHA, but I just know they're in every community basically across Canada. So, and stigma. Stigma is what the majority of Rwandans are afraid of due to the culture. Yes. So thank you, Beyond the Veil, for initiating this talk about mental health. That's a really, really deep part of the mission of Beyond the Veil. There's a whole, I'm not even necessarily going to get into it, but there's a whole reason why we're having these talks, because we want to address this because of, you know, we've seen the impact of not talking about some of these things and what happens amongst the Rwandan community. So yes, thank you everybody for sharing that. Okay, so I'm just gonna check in here with Lydia, who's really the master of ceremonies here. Do I have a few more minutes to share? You're muted. You're muted, Lydia, so I didn't hear what you said.
I was saying that it would depend on you if you, okay. Yeah, that would depend on you. Thank you.
Okay, so if you all don't mind, I'm going to share just a little bit more. And even though we had the Jamboard set up, I think I want to be really efficient so that Kaneza can speak some more, I think. And we did try the Jamboard and you had that experience. If you have any questions, though, please share in the chat and I will get to them, right? Or we as a team will get to them. Because the reason why I wanted to have a few more minutes was I want to talk a little bit about addiction. This is just a slide that just talks about some of the signs of addiction. And really, they're basically taken right from a lot of the literature, like the professional literature on addiction. So I'm not necessarily, I mean, it's one of those slides that has a lot of words on it, so I apologize. I didn't know what I was thinking when I made this slide. I guess I just put the stuff on there that I thought was important. But I'll just pull out a few examples. So taking more of the substance, so drinking more alcohol than what you meant to, not being able to quit, you know, whether it's alcohol or marijuana, right? Or even heroin, like someone mentioned earlier. Experiencing strong cravings to use whatever the substance is. Neglecting your responsibilities in favor of using the substance. So these are all signs that there's a problem, all right? Continuing to use the substance even though there's problems going on for the person. And then eventually needing more of the substance, so drinking more and more and more to get the effect that you wanted. So if you want to get that feeling that you get when you're drinking, maybe the first time you drank, it happened after 1 drink. But then if you keep drinking, eventually it's going to take 3 drinks or 4 drinks or 5 drinks to get that same feeling. That's something that's called tolerance, like that's what it's officially called. And that is another big sign of alcohol addiction, or any other kind of addiction too. Like it happens with other drugs too. Cocaine, it happens with heroin. Yeah, it probably happens with marijuana too, actually, for that matter. So these are important things to kind of be thinking about. So the idea then, so the question then we might have is, how do we support someone who has some of these issues with drinking and or with addiction? And again, a lot of it's the same kind of thing that you see with mental illness. It's very, very similar, advice, except that what you'll see with addiction stuff is there's a more emphasis on you. There's a bit more emphasis on you putting up boundaries. Okay, so that's the important exception, I think. I mean, it's also important for helping someone with mental illness. You got to know how much is too much to give, right? But for drinking and alcohol, it's maybe even more important in some ways. So first of all, you can keep in mind that your loved one's addiction is not your fault. It might feel like it if it's like your husband or your wife or your son or daughter or one of your parents or your sister or brother. Even if it's a close relative, it's not your fault. It's their maybe a bunch of different decisions that they've made that's led to it. All right, so don't blame yourself. Really important. You can be supportive and helpful, but ultimately the decision to get treatment is up to the individual. This is actually true for all mental illness or depression and all those things we've talked about already, but it's also just important to remember for drug and alcohol help too. So you can be there, you could be a listening, loving influence in their life, and you can help them with whatever they want you to help with, but there's only so much you can do. And there's that boundary thing there again, right? So the boundary is that you can't force them to get help. It's up to them to follow through and get that help. So that's hard. Like a lot of people don't understand that. They really just want their loved one to be helped, and they wish that there was something that they could do. And again, you can listen, you can love them, you can help them to create like as healthy lifestyle as possible. But if they don't want to help themselves, there's only so much you can do. And that's a hard thing for people to accept. That's a hard thing for me to say because I know it maybe takes away some of the hope, but it's just the truth. If you keep giving too much, you're going to be harming yourself, and you're not going to be helping the addiction actually, right? So that person needs to decide for themselves if they want the help. And that's exactly what that last point's talking about. Accepting what you cannot control is a big part of surviving a loved one's addiction. Okay, so it's a huge, huge piece there. All right, let's continue on here. How to talk to your loved one about getting help. So if you can approach your loved one when they're already trying to quit using. That's the best. When they already want to quit, then you have an easy conversation. They've acknowledged the problem, and all you have to do is just kind of support them in that decision, right? But a lot of times people really aren't there yet. They don't want help yet. So what you can do is you can express your concern about them and about what they're doing in an empathetic and a caring way, right? A lot of times people think that we have to like confront our loved ones and say, stop drinking, and like, you know, get all over them and you know, be like that, but that actually is not very effective. It, like even the research says, it just makes people get all defensive and they'll just dig in their heels and drink even more just to spite you. A lot of people would do that. Or they feel really judged, right? Because remember I said earlier, a lot of people drink to deal with pain. So these are people a lot of times who are in pain. So if we just like full on, like just confront them in a really aggressive way, it's not helpful to them, right? They're already hurting. They might already feel guilty about what they're doing. So if you can approach them in a loving, caring way, that's actually the most helpful way to do it. Remain calm, easy to say, I know, but the research shows that if you can do that, then in a conversation, the conversation will turn out better. And then if you have some ideas on treatment or ways that they can stop, then you can also share that with them too. And so treatment, I mean, one thing is, yes, you can send them to like a counselor or something, but if you don't have access to that, maybe treatment is, well, instead of drinking, you know, after work, you know, going to the local bar or something, like maybe come home, we'll spend some time together and I'll help you to like, you know, we'll find something else to do together instead of drinking, right? So you can come up with like a plan that makes sense for them, even if you don't have access to a counselor, all right? A lot of times it's replacing the drinking or the drug use behavior for something else that is positive and that's not gonna hurt them. So what not to do? So don't approach them or confront them in public, or if they're under the influence of their substance, so if they're drunk or if they're high, right? Avoid judgment and blame. Like I said earlier, a lot of times people are already feeling guilt. They're already suffering, actually. So I know this might sound strange. I know that I come from a culture that would just like beat the person over the head almost and say, hey, listen, you know, you've got to stop drinking. But that doesn't really help people, right? It's much better to come in with a more compassionate kind of response. And just to give you an idea, I'm going to be done in just a couple minutes here. So thank you for giving me some extra time. And avoid being aggressive and confrontational, right? This behavior could actually push the person away. And so earlier I mentioned boundaries. So what are some boundaries? Like, what are boundaries all about? What do I mean when I talk about that? Well, boundaries help to protect your emotional and physical health. And you must decide that you're what you're no longer willing to accept, and make these boundaries clear to your loved ones. So here's some examples of boundaries. So you can see when someone is getting addicted to alcohol or drugs, you can see how some of this stuff becomes a challenge, and it's a little bit different than mental illness. So some example of boundaries might be, I'm not going to bail you out of jail anymore. Like I've had it, like I'm done with doing that. That's setting a boundary, saying I'm not going to do that anymore. I will not tolerate you drinking or using drugs in our home, right? That might be a boundary you'll have to put down. If you do, you won't be allowed to live here anymore. I will not lie about your intoxication, your drunkenness or your hangovers anymore. I refuse to call in sick for you. I'm not going to give you money so that you can use a drug. And I will not tolerate your angry outbursts towards me. If you are going to be like this, you're not going to be allowed to live in this home anymore. So that's where it kind of feels confrontational, but all you're doing is setting up a boundary. It's clear, it's compassionate, it's soft, you're remaining calm, but you have to decide what that boundary is that you're not going to go over, you're not going to allow to be stepped over anymore, for your own protection and for the protection of your loved one. So this is an important, tricky part of having a loved one with an addiction. So how to help, this will be the last slide. Yeah, this is the last slide I'm going to talk about, so you can see I'm just about done. If you feel your loved one is abusing drugs, the best thing you can do is encourage them to seek out treatment. But again, I understand that treatment's not available to everybody for reasons we talked about earlier. So you can also be loving and supportive. I know that they are probably going to make excuses for their behaviors, so you don't want to necessarily support that, but you can still be loving and supportive to them. And at the same time, be firm in what you want and keep encouraging them to get help. So again, the keys in working with mental illness, including depression, including schizophrenia, and also addictions of all different kinds, including sex addiction, which we actually haven't really spoken much about. I apologize for the person who asked about that, is to listen, right? If someone's opening up to you, listen to them, be a listening presence, be a loving, caring presence, but also don't forget yourself, right? Make sure that you are taking care of yourself in this, that you're holding your boundaries really strongly, and that you are doing the things that you need to do to make sure that you are healthy and strong too, okay? So those are really the bottom lines. That's my email address.
Can Ben come over and do yoga?
I heard someone say yoga. Yeah, yoga can be helpful, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know who said that, but good point. So yeah, so there's the question about stigma. Yes, if you have any more questions, let me know, because I will be darting out in a minute here. But the question about stigma. So this is a great question. And of course, I'm working with people right now who are newcomers to Canada from various cultures, and most of the cultures, sorry, I thought my chair was gonna break. Most of the cultures are people who they don't really like to talk about their mental illness, right? So, in terms of, really people kind of have to get help for themselves. But what you can do is you can educate, right? You can educate people about some of the symptoms of mental illness. You can also educate people about what mental illness really is all about, which is really, it's like our bodies. Our bodies get sick at times, or there's things that don't work in our bodies. Well, our brains, which is where our mental stuff is stored, our emotions and our thoughts, sometimes our brains get ill. Sometimes our brains, are struggling too, right? There isn't really much of a difference. So you might be able to approach it that way. You might also be able to inform people that if you want them to get help, that it's confidential. So anybody who emails me on this email address, I'm not going to tell anybody that you've emailed me. I'm not going to share your name with anybody. It stays between you and I, right? And that's the same thing for any kind. That'd be the same for Kaneza. That'd be the same for any therapist or counselor or organization or doctor out there. At least that's the way it should be, right? So helping them to understand the nature of different services like that would be really helpful. And again, I think just being listening and being understanding. I think you having an attitude of not judging them will help them to realize, oh, okay, so yeah, like maybe it's okay for me to that I'm struggling. Maybe knowing that other people are struggling too makes them think, okay, I'm not the only one, right? I'm not just going crazy here. But you having a reaction saying, hey, it's understandable, or hey, thank you for sharing. I love you, I appreciate you, you have a lot of great qualities, but let's see what we can do to help you with this, that goes a long way in helping people to reach out. But I think it comes with education. I think it comes with a little bit of cultural change too. And so having something like Beyond the Veil actually try to communicate with people about this stuff is really important. It's just another way that people address that. All right, so are there any other questions before I deal with my allergies? You've been seeing me wipe my nose all presentation long. Someone did earlier mention sex addiction. A lot of these things are important. Sex addiction, of course, will come with a lot of guilt and shame too, I think, particularly for people who, maybe are Christian or even Muslim too, maybe, I'm not sure, but certainly Christian, other people too might have shame about it. So that can be a really, really difficult thing. The thing about that one, of course, is depending on what the sexual addiction looks like, there might be the risk of HIV or STDs and stuff too. Now, if it's just something that's internally, just something that they're thinking about, or maybe they're watching pornography or something like that, again, being a listening help is really important. Talking not necessarily about what they're actually doing, not going into detail, because that might trigger the addiction, but just talking about just the fact that they're doing it and being supportive of them. Not condoning what they're doing, of course, but just being supportive of them in a general sense would be really helpful again. And then strategizing with them on different ways that they can resist the temptation would be important. So if they know that, for instance, they watch porn or look at bad websites or whatever when, let's say it's 10 o'clock at night, and no one is home, well then maybe, whatever device that they're using to do that, maybe you can have it, right? You can work with them to say, listen, I'll take your device at 10 o'clock, and that way you have no way of accessing this stuff. And until it becomes a habit that you're not going to be doing it anymore, right? So there's really practical kind of things like that you can do with someone if they're really open to talk to you about that, to address that. And if it's you yourself who's struggling with that, then maybe, I know it's super embarrassing, but you can reach out to someone and ask them to do that, or you can try it on your own. Let's say there's a certain device and 10 o'clock at night, you go on it and bad things happen. Well, maybe you can leave that device in another room and go to bed at 10 and then see if that would help, see if that would minimize the behavior. Anyways, thank you once again. This is my last, in this series at least, of course, I hope to continue to be a part of this amazing movement of Beyond the Veil, but this is my last presentation. Thank you to everybody who has listened in. I know I talked a lot today, but hopefully this has been helpful. It's always a privilege to contribute to the Rwandan community in this way and to support you all. If you have any questions, please email me. Again, this is a professional email. This is one of the universities that I teach at. It's the email for that. So I'll keep any email confidential. You could also reach out to Beyond the Veil directly through social media. So thank you once again. So I'll hand it over to the team to take it from here.
Yes, Brent, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a journey, and we thank you so much for always supporting our community. We've learned a lot, and no doubt we're going to continue to learn together. And yeah, that was a very interesting conversation. Many people really in our DMs. Most of the questions are about, how can we take care of how can we take care of a loved one or a friend suffering from a mental illness? So sometimes, we don't even know, how to help them in a way, because what I've learned is that as much as that we're helping, these people in our lives, it is important that ourselves as well, we get some help. And I think Brent Kaneza touches on that part, because, our mental health, matter as well. Your self-care matter as well to be able to help somebody else. Remember, you can't, give what you can give to yourself. So it's important that you really help yourself. You find ways, to help yourself so you can be able to offer the help another person needs. So thank you so much, Brent. I think, we're close to the end. One moment. We are close to the end. I think, we're going to quickly take some questions. We're going to make sure by 3:30 we're done. So if anybody has a question, I think some of the people added the questions, under the chat. But if you have any particular question, regarding this presentation, even if you have a question, Kiaranda, if you can type it quickly or, unmute yourself to ask the question quickly, that would be helpful. Again, there are many ways that you can access help. And what matters the most is not like, trying to fix people. Because what we do when we have somebody struggling, we're trying what we can to fix people. We want their well-being, but the way we do it, sometimes it can be harsh. The same way we can force people with physical illness to get to get better quickly. That's the same way we can do people who have, mental illness. So if you have any question, please let me know. I see under the chat, people are saying thank you. Anyone with a question? Okay, so yeah, if no one has a question, I'm gonna ask I'm gonna ask Kaneza if she can, share with us a little bit as we close this conversation. This conversation is just like, less than 2 hours. There's a lot we can learn from this conversation, but at the same time, our goal is to open that conversation. Whatever you learn from here, whatever you see on our social platform, you just go home with your family members, somebody that just start that conversation. And, what matter, let's learn how to listen, because that's what people need. People who are struggling, they know all these things. They know that they're failing, they might be hurting people in a way. All those illness, they feel that, they know that. So we need to approach them, with different conversation, with different ways to talk, because whatever we're trying to, in any way we're trying to judge them, they have already said those things to themselves every single morning. I think one that was so shocked when I heard this conversation about a woman who struggled from a mental illness, and she was saying, from alcohol addiction, and she was saying that, I can die for my kids. I can do everything for my kids, but I can't stop drinking for my kids. So that's how I was like, oh my goodness, this is so really serious. So as much as she loves them so much, but there's less she can control. It's not her choice. What's happening within her mind, the choices that she's making, it's because she's sick in a way. So let's have compassion. Let's try to understand that people are not lazy. people are not just, difficult. People are not trying, to be crazy. Let's understand that mental illness is real. It's actually real, and understand that we really need to have compassion. And as I said, that 1 in 4 people, during their lives, they might have a mental illness. So, it can be you, it can be me. So we have to be kind to one another. So Kaneza, if you can share with us a little bit mu Kinyarwanda, wagira ikintu tubwira dusoza tukarangiza, urakoze.
Murakoze. Ndatekereza ibyinshi Brent yabivuze ku bijyanye nuko twakwita ku bantu bacu, ubuzima bwabo bwo mu mutwe ndetse natwe ubwacu. Mu by'ukuri byagiye byunganirana n'ibyo nanjye nari nabanje mvuga ku ntangiriro. Sinzi wenda niba washaringa gatoya tukavuga ku mwihariko wacu nanone ku bijyanye n'ububata bw'ibintu runaka, byaba ibiyobyabwenge, byaba imyifatire runaka. Sinzi niba wamfasha, kuko mu muco wacu harimo umwihariko gatoya numva twasangiraho gatoya tugana ku musozo. Hano tugiye kuganira rero kuri bwa bubata n'ubundi Brent amaze kuvugaho. Mu magambo make tumenye ko ari imyitwarire yisubiramo inshuro nyinshi, ikaba iganisha ku burwayi runaka cyangwa se izindi ngaruka mu buzima. Iyo myifatire igora uyifite kuyihagarika, kabone n'ubwo yaba azi ingaruka ahura nazo cyangwa se yaramaze gutangira guhura nazo. Ububata rero bushobora kuba ku bintu bitandukanye. Hari ibyo dufata nk'uko Brent yagiye abigarukaho: inzoga, amatabi, imiti runaka tutandikiwe n'abaganga, kwiyorohereza uburibwe, twakomeza rijya. Ibyo byose ni ukuvuga ngo cya kintu ukora inshuro nyinshi, ariko mu by'ukuri ukagikora utakibasha wowe kubyikuramo kandi uzi neza ingaruka bikuganishamo, ni ububata. Hari amoko y'ibintu bibata, twagerageje kubikarasa mu buryo bubiri. Hari ku miti, ku biyobyabwenge, ni ukuvuga ngo ku bintu umuntu akonsoma. Hano iwacu mu Rwanda cyane cyane hari inzoga z'inkorano, hari amatabi abantu banywa y'ibyatsi bahira. Uwo ni umwihariko ntekereza aho benshi muri mwe muherereye bidahari, ariko hano iwacu birakoreshwa cyane. Ni ukuvuga ngo rero hari abantu babaswe nabyo kandi bikaba byaramaze kubagiraho ingaruka. Birakwiriye ko abona abo tubegera tukabamenyesha yuko hari uburyo bafashwa, ndetse natwe niba tubafite mu miryango yacu tumenye uko tubafasha, tumenye ko atari ukunanirana, tumenye ko ari kimwe mu burwayi bwo mu mutwe. Hari n'ububata ku myifatire runaka. Nk'abantu dukunda guhura nabo, by'umwihariko ngewe, ku bijyanye n'ububata mu myifatire, abenshi bafite ikibazo ku bubata mu bintu by'imikino y'amahirwe, ibyo dukunda kwita betting. Usanga abantu babaswe nabyo cyane. Ni ukuvuga ngo nubibona mu muryango wawe cyangwa se ahakuzengurutse, jya umenya ko ari uburwayi bwo mu mutwe, uwo muntu afashwe cyangwa se umushakire ubufasha. Tutararenga aho ngaho, icyo nakongeraho ni ukuvuga ngo ikintu kijya kwitwa yuko ari addiction cyangwa se ari ikintu cyabata umuntu mu gihe byamaze kugaragaza ko biganisha ku ngaruka mbi, ndetse abahanga barabikoreye ubushakashatsi. Ntabwo twava aha ngo tuvuge nitugenda mu ngo zacu tugasanga umuntu runaka afite imyifatire tutari gusobanukirwa cyangwa se afite ikintu akunda ngo tubyite ububata. Ni ukuvuga ngo bisaba yuko ari ikintu kiba cyarabushakashatsi kikemezwa. Mu Rwanda rero bihagaze biti. Hari imvugo cyangwa se umugani dukunda kuvuga yuko agatama ari mu cyurabuhoro. Ni ukuvuga ngo ni uburyo dukoresha mu kwiyorohereza cyangwa se mu buryo bwo gusabana. Mu muco wacu usanga inzoga, mu moko atandukanye y'inzoga, ni ikintu cyifashishwa cyane mu busabane, kandi twabonye ko umuco wacu wibanda cyane ku busabane, ariko kandi inifashishwa mu kwihumuriza. Ubushakashatsi rero bwakozwe mu 2018 bwagaragaje ko 1.6% babaswe n'inzoga. Inzoga ni y'amoko atandukanye, inzoga zipfundikiye niba ariko nabyita, n'inzoga nyarwanda, ibikwangari n'ibindi. 0.6% by'abantu bakorewe ubushakashatsi basanze bafite ubundi bubata nk'imiti. Hari abantu mu by'ukuri batajya kwivuza, akabaza ati nimbura ibitotsi nzafata ikinini runaka, akabana n'ubwo bubata kandi akababana nabyo nta wundi muntu ubizi, ariko akaba azi ko ku musego ku gitanda cye afite akanini afata kugira ngo asinzire, cyangwa se akaba azi ko hari agacupa afata mbere yo kuryama. Ibyo nabyo twabikangurira abantu bakamenya yuko ari ububata. Rero ni iki twakora mu mwihariko wacu nk'abanyarwanda? Icya mbere kaduhindura uko tubibona. Umuntu wese amenye ko ububata ari uburwayi, ntabwo ari ingeso mbi. Ntabwo mu by'ukuri dukwiriye kujya aho ngaho ngo ducire abantu imanza. Ni ukuvuga ngo umuntu akenshi ajya kubatwa n'ikintu kubera ko yakibonyemo igisubizo cy'ikibazo runaka we yari afite. Kujya rero kumucira urubanza ni ukumwongerera umutwaro. Ahubwo tumufashe, duhindure uko tubibona, dushake izindi mbaraga zasimbura za zindi yabuze zimuganisha ku bubata. Twabahamiriza neza ko ufashijwe abasha gukira, ariko bitwara igihe, umuntu agenda azamuka asubira hasi. Bisaba rero kudacika intege kuri twebwe biyemeje gushyigikira uwo muntu uri mu bubata bw'ikintu icyo ari cyo cyose. Ikindi, mu gihe ubonye utabishoboye cyangwa se utazi uko wabyitwaramo, ni byiza gushaka ubufasha, ariko ntitureberere ibyo bintu kuko biratumaraho abantu, cyane cyane urubyiruko n'abantu bakuze kuva ku myaka 45 gusubiza hejuru. N'ibyo byiciro bigaragaramo ububata ku bintu bitandukanye. Ndumva rero tugana ku musozo, ubushakashatsi bwagaragaje ko 30% by'ibibazo byo mu mutwe byakumirwa cyangwa se bigakira mu gihe abantu twebwe ubwacu mu ngo zacu tubashije kumenya amahame yibanze yo kwita ku buzima bwo mu mutwe. Niyo mpamvu nk'uko Beyond the Veil ikunda kubishimangira, dushyira imbaraga mu kumenyesha abantu uburyo bwo kwiyitaho. Uyu munsi buri muntu wese atwaye uwo mukoro akumva ko afite uruhare rwa 30% bwo gukumira uburwayi bwo mu mutwe, n'undi sosiyete nyarwanda yarushaho kugenda igubwa neza. Rero ni inshingano za buri wese, numva nabiha buri muntu wese wateranye umugoroba kumva ko ari umukoro. Ndabashimiye cyane rero ntatwaye umwanya munini. Murakoze. Lydia, wasubirana umwanya.
Yes, murakoze cyane. Murakoze cyane ababanye natwe uyu munsi. Kwa gatandatu dufite ikiganiro cyacu muri iyi porogaramu twari twatangiye kuva mu kwa mbere. Nicyo kiganiro cya nyuma, tuzagira ibindi muri future, ariko muri iyi project ya Get Beyond Programming izaba ariyo workshop ya nyuma. Please karibu mutumire abantu, cyane cyane ko twitegura icyunamo, kandi iki kiganiro tuzagira kizavuga ku buryo harya grieving ni mu Kinyarwanda, kuririra umuntu wawe nk'abantu wapfushije umuntu, kumuririra, kunamira umuntu wawe, ni gute bikorwa. Turebye neza ari indwara nyinshi zangiza ubuzima bwo mu mutwe, kubera ko twabonye umwanya wo kunamira abantu bacu, cyane cyane twebwe abanyarwanda. Ubuze abantu barenga 30, 40, 50 igihe kimwe, bose ntabwo baririra icyarimwe. Burya buri muntu wese mufite relationship itandukanye, buri wese umuririra uko bimeze. Tuva mu muco, iyo turi kunamira abacu barakubwira komera, ihangane, umugabo ubuze umwana uzabyara undi, amagambo menshi akomeretsa atoroshye. Ariko reka tugire icyo tubiganiraho twitegura no kwinjira mu cyunamo. Mwakoze cyane, turasoje ikiganiro. Mutore twarengejeho iminota, ariko turabishimiye cyane. Umunsi mwiza. Bye mwese.
Ihangane gatoya dusharinge nimero bari bayidusabye, cyangwa wamufasha ukabisharinga byihuse. Muri comment bari gusaba nimero ye ku bantu bakeneye ubufasha mu Rwanda na email.
Okay, nayishyize muri comment. Hagize mushobora no kutwandikira, yaba njyewe, Kaneza, Judith, Beyond the Veil, mwatubaza hose nta kibazo. Ari umunsi mwiza mwese, turabashimiye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.